She stood at the threshold of the briefing room, boots worn from miles of asphalt and skyflight suit faded from sun and sand. 20 men looked up as if they'd smelled something out of place. The air tightened not with sound but with expectation and judgment. Have you ever entered a room where your worth was decided before you even spoke? Where your years of experience meant less than the insignia on someone else's ring? That was this moment stretched between silence and scorn. The commander didn't say her name. He just laughed a sharp, controlled burst that sliced through the quiet. It wasn't joy. It was warning. She thinks she can fly that. He muttered to no one in particular and everyone at once. His tone didn't need volume to wound. The laughter that followed wasn't loud either, but it echoed just the same. Sarah Ellis didn't move. Not when his gaze pinned her like an insect. Not when the whispers started low and lazy, curling through the room like smoke. Another woman chasing ghosts in a man's cockpit. Another dream that would die mid-air. She took one step forward, not defiant, just deliberate. The silence grew teeth. Somewhere near the coffee pot, someone cleared their throat, and it sounded like surrender. The commander took a step toward her, close enough that she could smell the starch in his uniform. "This isn't crop dusting, sweetheart. This is the B-2. The words settled heavy and final. And still Sarah didn't blink. She just looked ahead like she already knew how the story ended, and it didn't involve asking for permission. Sarah Ellis was 35, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who'd seen much more than her age should allow. Years spent in cockpits under fire pulling wounded soldiers from heat-scorched landing zones had etched fine lines across her face. They weren't just marks of time. They were proof of choices most people would never have to make. She'd flown Apache helicopters in Afghanistan through sandstorms thick enough to blot out the sun and firefights loud enough to drown thought. In places where GPS blinked out and maps were suggestions she had learned to fly by instinct. Her gut had kept her alive more than any manual ever could. Her childhood wasn't about Barbie dolls or ballet. It was about airfields and checklists, afternoons spent in hangars with her father, a pilot whose name still meant something in military circles. Robert Ellis was the kind of man people told stories about. The kind who flew into hurricanes for weather recon and tested aircraft no one else dared to touch. He taught her how to feel a plane through her fingertips, how to read clouds like old friends, how to stay calm when systems failed and death got too close. She learned early that machines don't care about your gender. They only care if you listen, if you respect their limits, if you know when to push and when to pull back. By 22, she had her wings. Not through the academy or a legacy pipeline, but through grit, talent, and the kind of training you can't buy. Her first deployments were brutal. Dust in every crevice, the constant thud of rotor blades against desert air, and the knowledge that one wrong move meant a dozen folded flags. She got hit once by shrapnel from a roadside blast while hovering for a medevac. It tore into her left shoulder and never quite healed right. She joked sometimes that it predicted rain better than any weather app. Her hearing in one ear was less than perfect thanks to rockets that came too close. Too often, but she never let it slow her down. Everything she learned, she earned the hard way. Yet every time she walked into a room like the one today, none of it seemed to matter. They didn't see the combat patches or the citations. They saw someone who didn't come from the academy. Someone who didn't play golf with the right colonels or carry the right last name. Still, she stood straight. Not proud in the way people sometimes confuse with arrogance, but grounded, like someone who knew her worth even if others didn't. Sarah had spent a lifetime being underestimated. She had also spent a lifetime proving people wrong without needing to shout about it. What she lacked in pedigree, she more than made up for in skill, and she carried that skill quietly like a well-folded map tucked deep in her jacket, always ready when the moment called for it. Even here, surrounded by people who judged her before she spoke, she carried herself with calm. Not because she expected them to respect her, but because she didn't need them to. She already knew who she was, and in the air when it came down to it, that was the only thing that ever mattered. Whiteman Air Force Base looked like any other from a distance. Long gray runways guarded gates and rows of aircraft under endless sky. But up close, it was different. It was the home of the B-2 Spirit, the stealth bomber that cost more than most towns and carried the weight of national secrets in every flight. Inside its walls, the air was thick with legacy. Not just of aircraft or strategy, but of men who came from the same places, wore the same rings, and told the same stories. It was a world built on unspoken rules, where your worth wasn't what you'd done, but who remembered you from the Academy's winter formal. Pilots here didn't just fly. They belonged to something. Something passed down, not earned. Sons of generals, nephews of senators, godsons of colonels who'd flown in wars long since studied in textbooks. Their stories started with names, not missions. Their power was inherited, their path smoothed by dinners and favors. Sarah wasn't one of them. She had come up through ROTC at a public school with more rust than funding. Her commissioning ceremony was in a gym with broken bleachers. Her flight hours were earned in helicopters patched with duct tape and flown over mountains where the maps ended. She didn't go to golf tournaments with commanders or spend weekends at alumni events sipping from silver cups. She learned leadership on the flight line in the dust and silence. Her mentors were crew chiefs who bled for every sortie and fellow pilots who counted seconds under fire, not connections on LinkedIn. At Whiteman, that made her an outsider. Not because she lacked skill, but because she lacked the code, the shared language of pedigree, the jokes that circled back to training days in Colorado Springs, the understanding that if you were one of them, doors opened before you even knocked. In that culture, Sarah was tolerated. Barely. Her presence was like a pebble in a shoe, small but constantly felt. A reminder that someone could get here without being invited, without being groomed for it since birth. She noticed how conversations paused when she entered a room, how flight schedules shifted subtly to avoid pairing her with certain people, how her ideas at briefings were often ignored until repeated by someone else with the right background. It wasn't personal. That was the strange part. It was structural. Like the base itself, everything seemed designed to filter out people like her. Not through rules, but through rituals. Not through orders, but through omission. Sarah knew this. She felt it in the sideways glances, the clipped tones, the way her accomplishments were met with faint nods instead of congratulations. Still, she showed up, on time, every time, because she believed that excellence should be enough, even if it rarely was. The B-2 program was more than elite. It was sacred. Only a handful of pilots would ever sit in that cockpit, and most of them looked alike, spoke alike, believed alike. Sarah didn't fit that mold, which meant to them, she didn't belong. But she was there. Badge-scanned clearances, verified qualifications solid. Every morning she walked through the same hangar doors, past the same photos of men who'd worn the uniform before her. She walked with quiet steps and steady breath, not asking to be welcomed, just refusing to be erased. The mission briefing started like any other. Cold coffee, stiff backs, a screen glowing with maps no one wanted to see. But then the tone shifted. A satellite classified beyond normal levels was falling from orbit. Its technology was so sensitive that letting it crash, uncontrolled, could trigger more than headlines. It could spark international chaos. The commander didn't pace. He didn't raise his voice. That made it worse. His calm wrapped the room like a net. Recovery was possible, but only if the mission launched in the next few hours. The path to the satellite would thread through a storm so brutal it made even seasoned pilots hesitate. He looked around the room, naming his picks. Matthews, Thompson, Rivera. Each one gave a reason. Food poisoning, crew rest rules, medical appointments that suddenly couldn't wait. They didn't even blush. The silence after each excuse lasted just long enough to echo. Sarah watched it happen without blinking. It wasn't fear. It was strategy. None of them wanted the risk. They could smell career death in the air and decided no medal was worth it. This wasn't just a mission. It was a bet. One wrong move, and you'd be done. Not dead, maybe, but grounded, forgotten. Another name was called. Another delay. Another polite dodge. The storm was getting worse by the minute. The window was closing. The satellite kept falling. By the time the commander's eyes landed on Sarah, the room had emptied itself of options. She was the last one standing. No excuse, no hesitation, just her file, her record, and a silence heavy with judgment. She met his stare without flinching. He called her name like it tasted wrong in his mouth. Mitchell. Then came the pause, the slow acknowledgement that this wasn't a choice. It was necessity. Around her, chairs creaked. Men shifted, some ashamed, others just relieved it wasn't them. She stepped forward with a voice steady as concrete. "Yes, sir. Qualified, current, certified." The tension didn't break. It sharpened. Because now the woman they didn't want to acknowledge had become the only hope they had left. And she knew it. She had barely finished confirming her qualifications when the commander cut her off. His tone wasn't congratulatory. It was clipped cold, like reading off a penalty instead of an assignment. He didn't commend her readiness or thank her for stepping up. He just added another line. "Captain Reynolds will ride in the jump seat. He'll take over if needed." That part wasn't in the plan. Sarah knew it the moment he said it. No one else had been assigned a chaperone. None of the men were told they'd be monitored or replaced mid-air. But here she was, not trusted to fly solo, not even trusted to follow orders without someone sitting behind her like a babysitter with stripes. Reynolds entered like he already owned the mission. Perfect uniform, expensive cologne, and the relaxed arrogance of someone who had never had to prove anything twice. He offered a practiced smile, too polished, too confident. She didn't return it. The commander's instructions kept coming. No deviations, no decisions. Just fly the plan. His words were sharp, each one a warning. He didn't want her to succeed. He wanted her contained, predictable. If things went wrong, he already had a backup plan sitting one seat behind. Sarah nodded through it all, not because she agreed, but because dignity doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just listens and remembers. Around her, the same pilots who'd stepped back now watched in silence. They had the experience, the training, the legacy, but they also had fear, the kind that made them choose safety over courage. They questioned her capability while hiding from the risk themselves. She didn't respond to their glances. She just moved through the final preparations with methodical calm. Every system check, every confirmation, every box ticked with surgical control. The uniform didn't change. The airframe didn't care. And the storm wouldn't adjust itself for politics. They had tried to sideline her, strip her of authority with a co-pilot and a caveat. But they couldn't erase her name from the mission log. They couldn't fly the plane without her. And they couldn't undo the fact that when no one else stood up, she did. She didn't need them to believe. She just needed the runway. The cockpit was quiet, filled only with the soft sounds of systems powering up and switches clicking into place. Sarah moved through her final checks with the calm of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. Her hands were steady, her focus razor-sharp, each motion deliberate and precise. Outside, the wind howled low against the hangar walls, carrying the bite of the storm that was building fast. Inside, the tension wrapped tighter. The tower cleared them for immediate departure, but the voice that came next wasn't the controller's. The commander's voice crackled into her headset, too smooth, too timed. He wanted to run her through emergency procedures again, not because he doubted her knowledge, but because he wanted to remind the room and perhaps himself that she was still on trial. She didn't argue. She didn't sigh. She just responded: engine failure on takeoff, throttle idle brakes, max speed brakes deploy. Her tone didn't falter. Not when he asked about cabin decompression, not when he quizzed her on fuel distribution, not when Reynolds chuckled behind her like it was all some test she was lucky to take. She gave answers with no room for doubt, not robotic, just certain. The kind of certainty you only earn when your mistakes cost lives, the kind born from training that happens in deserts and mountains, not classrooms. Each delay ate into her launch window. The satellite kept falling. The storm kept growing, and she kept waiting, fuel-burning sweat starting to rise under her collar despite the cold. Reynolds leaned back, watching with too much interest. He didn't have to answer these questions. No one ever asked him twice. He was there for the illusion of control, a backup plan dressed in a clean uniform. Finally, the weather officer broke through the chatter. Winds approaching crosswind limits. Any aircraft not airborne soon would be grounded indefinitely. The commander tried one more stall, but the urgency in the air had shifted. The delay was becoming a liability. Sarah keyed the mic. Ghost 51. Ready for immediate departure. The controller didn't hesitate. Cleared for takeoff runway 3. She pushed the throttles forward and the engines roared in response. The B-2 surged forward, heavy and reluctant at first, then building speed like a beast waking up. The storm pressed against them even as they rolled, wind shoving at the wings, the rain streaking across the windshield in sheets. At rotation speed, she eased the nose-up hands, firm but fluid. The aircraft lifted into the air, slicing upward into clouds that swallowed the horizon. Reynolds made a sound behind her. Half surprise, half silence. The climb was rough from the start. Turbulence hit in waves, jarring the controls with sharp slaps. Warning lights blinked, but nothing critical. Not yet. She stayed locked in scanning, adjusting flying by both feel and numbers. Reynolds offered advice. She ignored it. He didn't know this sky. He didn't know what it meant to fly through chaos you couldn't control. Up ahead, lightning split the clouds, illuminating their path in harsh white flashes. The kind of light that doesn't reveal. It blinds. Still, she didn't flinch. She adjusted trim, increased climb rate, pushed for altitude where the air would thin and the chaos might give way to clarity. Behind her, the commander's silence stretched long. No more questions. No more corrections. Just the sound of a jet in storm and a pilot who had already proven everything she needed to. The sky didn't care who she was, only how she flew. The storm didn't wait for altitude. It met them early, throwing fists of turbulence that rocked the B-2 with the weight of nature's fury. Ice clawed at the windshield, building faster than the heat coils could melt it. Visibility dropped to inches, then to memory. Sarah gripped the controls like she was shaking hands with an old threat. Her breathing stayed calm, her eyes moved with precision, but her muscles worked overtime. The aircraft bucked, rolled, jerked left, then dropped, then rose again like a living thing trying to shake her loose. The cockpit filled with noise. Alerts chimed in angry patterns. Angle of attack, airspeed deviation, ice accumulation. Each warning came with its own pitch and rhythm, a choir of crisis. Reynolds fumbled for a checklist, but she was already responding. She didn't look at him. Her hands knew what to do. This wasn't her first fight with a sky that wanted her gone. Afghanistan had taught her how to trust her instincts when systems failed and the world stopped making sense. She felt the rudder needed a touch more resistance. Knew the ailerons were sluggish under this kind of stress. She didn't think. She adjusted. Small moves, micro-corrections, the same way her dad once taught her using a paper airplane in a windy day. Lightning lit the cockpit again. Reynolds cursed under his breath. She didn't flinch. Not when the horizon vanished. Not when the altimeter dipped. Not when the aircraft tilted just enough to trigger another caution. He asked if they should level off. She didn't answer. The question was fear in a clean uniform. Fear dressed up as protocol. She climbed higher, trusting her feel, trusting what the sensors couldn't read and what the training manuals never taught. Reynolds leaned forward, tried again. She cut him off with a course correction so tight the wings groaned. But the jet held. It always held when flown right. For a moment, the turbulence hit hard enough to knock his clipboard loose. It clattered to the floor. He left it there. She didn't notice. Her focus was ahead, through the storm, through the chaos, through the pressure. She silenced another alert, another stall warning, another lie told by a machine that didn't understand she had flown worse. In war zones, with no backup in valleys, with no way out, she had survived more than a thunderstorm. At 39,000 feet, the clouds closed in so thick they felt like a wall. She pushed harder. Her arms ached. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes never left the flight path. Her father's voice echoed somewhere beneath the noise. Trust the vibration. Trust the shift. Machines speak if you know how to listen. They hit clear air at 42,000 feet. Just for a second. The quiet was so sudden it felt wrong. Reynolds looked around like he expected the storm to chase them. She took a breath. Just one. Then climbed again. At 45,000 feet, they skimmed the edge of the storm. The world looked thinner, the blue darker. The lightning below painted the clouds like wildfires trapped in cotton. She didn't stare. She kept flying. Reynolds was quiet now. No jokes, no second guessing. Just silence and the occasional breath caught on his mic. He was seeing it. What she was doing. What she had done. Sarah didn't need his words. She didn't need the approval. The aircraft responded to her hands, and that was enough. Each move told its own truth. At 49,000 feet, they broke free. The stars appeared. The storm swirled below like an angry sea that had missed its target. She steadied the aircraft, checked systems, checked fuel, checked herself. Her arms shook just slightly, but her grip didn't falter. The worst of the storm was behind them. But the mission was just beginning, and now finally they all knew who was really flying the plane. The recovery system failed without warning. Lights that were supposed to turn green stayed dark. Indicators blinked in red patterns no one wanted to see. The satellite was on approach, falling fast, and their window was closing. Reynolds started reading diagnostics, but the codes kept piling up. Faults in deployment, failures in hydraulics, backup system offline. The computer had run out of solutions. The mission was about to unravel. Sarah didn't hesitate. She unstrapped her harness, movement smooth but urgent. Reynolds reached out, confused and afraid. He warned her that leaving the seat at this altitude was suicide. She ignored him. There was a manual override. Her father had shown it to her once in an old diagram years before she'd ever touched this aircraft. He said every system needs something analog, something mechanical, something human. She slipped past Reynolds and crawled into the equipment bay behind the cockpit. The space was tight, filled with cold air that bit at her lungs. Her breath fogged instantly. She had minutes, maybe less, before hypoxia would set in. Her fingers were already stiff. The temperature here at 49,000 feet was punishing. She reached for the panel beneath the auxiliary control box. Bolts sealed shut from years of never being used. She didn't pause. The storm outside felt distant, but the danger inside was immediate. Every second was a countdown, every movement a gamble. She wedged her body against the sidewall, using her shoulders for leverage. The lever was frozen in place. It looked simple, a small bar tucked behind a steel frame. But it didn't move. Her gloves slipped. Her knuckles split open on sharp metal. She gritted her teeth and braced harder. She thought about her dad. The way he explained redundancy. The way he'd said machines can fail, but people don't give up. She took off one glove for better grip. The cold was blinding. Her vision narrowed. Her breath came in gasps. She pulled again, harder this time. Her shoulders screamed. Her body trembled. Still nothing. The silence in the aircraft was deafening now. The cockpit didn't call her back. No one told her what to do next. She adjusted her angle, used both hands, locked her feet into a brace. She remembered her father's words. It just needs enough force and the right direction. The lever moved a fraction, then stopped. She didn't stop. With one last push, she used everything she had. The metal groaned. Ice cracked. The lever gave way with a loud snap. Systems roared back to life. Lights turned green. The panel lit up like a victory. Sarah collapsed backward, her body sagging against the cold wall. Her lungs fought to pull in air. Her eyes blurred. But the mission was still on. The satellite could still be caught. She pulled herself back toward the cockpit, every inch a battle. Her body felt heavy, her head swam. But she made it. She dropped into her seat, hands already reaching for the controls. Reynolds didn't say anything. His eyes were wide, his hands frozen above the switches. She didn't look at him. She re-engaged the flight systems, adjusted the intercept trajectory, rechecked the timer. The aircraft responded. The recovery arm extended. Everything locked into place. She gave one nod more to herself than to anyone else. It worked. Because she knew where to go. Because her father had taught her. Because she didn't give up when the system failed. She made it work when it mattered most. The satellite was secure, clamped beneath them like a secret too valuable to lose. But the celebration was cut short by a new warning. Fuel consumption had spiked. The drag from the payload was bleeding reserves faster than planned. Sarah scanned the displays. They didn't have enough to hold altitude and wait out the storm. Standard protocol was to refuel mid-air or divert. But the tanker wasn't available, and diversion meant abandoning the satellite. That wasn't an option. She looked at the radar. The storm below stretched for hundreds of miles, layered and violent, painted in thick red and purple. Most pilots would have called it impassable. Reynolds already did, but Sarah didn't see it the same way. Her eyes traced the patterns. Rotating cells, wind shear lines. She looked for the spaces in between. Her father once told her weather had rhythm. You just had to listen. Between every gust, a gap. Between every storm wall, a thread. There. A sucker hole. Narrow, unstable, maybe open for 3 minutes at best. But just enough. If they hit it at the right angle with the right speed, they could slip through before the currents closed again. Reynolds called it suicide. She called it math. She mapped the entry point, adjusted descent rate, ran the numbers in her head. Every second mattered. Every degree of pitch was the difference between control and chaos. She keyed the mic. Negative command. Unable to maintain altitude. Fuel insufficient. Executing manual descent. The response crackled back. Delay. Hold. Wait for clearance. She shut off the channel. Too much noise. Not enough time. Reynolds gripped the armrest. His voice dropped. If we miss the gap, we're finished. She nodded. If we make it, we're home. He didn't argue. He just looked out the window like he hoped to see something different. She eased the throttles down. Nose dipped. Airspeed climbed. The storm reached up claws of cloud and wind waiting to pull them in. She held her line, eyes locked on the radar, breathing slow, just like her father taught her. The storm doesn't move. You do. Make your move clean. The aircraft shuddered as they hit the upper edge of the turbulence. She felt it in the stick, in her ribs, in the back of her throat. But she didn't adjust. The path was true. The readings confirmed it. Reynolds called out speed and altitude, his voice steadier now. Something had shifted. He still didn't trust the storm, but he was starting to trust her. They entered the gap with 1 minute to spare. The winds whipped around them like water through a canyon. The B-2 danced, just barely staying inside the corridor of calm. Sarah rode it like a current. No sharp moves, just flow. Then silence. They burst through the bottom edge. The skies opened. Below them, the base came into view. Gray runway waiting like a finish line that didn't care how rough the race had been. Reynolds looked over stunned. She didn't look back. She was already preparing for landing. One last task, one last move. The hardest part was done. She had seen the path no one else did, and she had taken it. The runway shimmered ahead, damp from the storm that still lingered just beyond the horizon. Sarah guided the B-2 with the hands of someone who knew every groan and shiver of the machine. The satellite's weight shifted the balance, but she adjusted, anticipating each stubborn lean and drag. The base was quiet, but not asleep. Word had spread. Maintenance crews lined the taxiway, clipboards, forgotten eyes lifted. Pilots stood shoulder to shoulder, silent, scanning the sky. They weren't waiting for celebration. They were waiting for proof. The descent wasn't dramatic. It was precise. She held the aircraft steady through crosswinds that would have humbled most. The gear dropped clean, locked in place without complaint. Every control surface responded like it trusted her, like it always had. Reynolds didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence said everything. His breathing matched the rhythm of the aircraft, steady, now respectful. His hands hovered near the controls out of habit, not fear. Sarah brought the B-2 in low. Her eyes fixed, her mind calm. She flared gently, let the gear kiss the concrete instead of slam. The tires caught. The weight shifted. The jet slowed. No bounce, no slide. Just a clean, honest landing. Brakes engaged. Steering aligned. Directional control held without a twitch. The aircraft rolled to a stop at the end of the runway as if it had never left. She shut down the engines one by one, their hum fading into silence that stretched too long. Then the clapping started. It wasn't loud. It wasn't staged. It began with one voice, then two, then rolled into a steady rhythm of hands, meeting hands, crews, officers, even the skeptical ones. It wasn't applause for a hero. It was acknowledgement of something undeniable. The hangar doors opened. The commander stepped forward. No words, just footsteps, crisp and slow. He approached the aircraft, his jaw set, his expression unreadable. Sarah climbed down, her flight suit streaked with sweat dirt and something close to exhaustion. They stood face to face. The wind tugged at the edges of his coat. She didn't flinch, didn't speak, just met his stare with the same calm she'd carried into the storm. He raised his hand, not a half salute, not a token, a full, deliberate salute, sharp, controlled, meaningful, one that officers gave when they had no more arguments to make, when facts had replaced doubt. Sarah returned the salute without hesitation, then dropped her arm and stepped back. The commander didn't speak. He just nodded once, then turned and walked away. Reynolds followed her down, a different man than the one who'd boarded. His steps were slower. He looked around like he was seeing the base for the first time. He faced the line of senior staff, now gathering their faces tight with unreadable thought. He cleared his throat. then spoke with a voice that didn't shake. "That was the best flying I've ever seen. She didn't just bring us home. She made that aircraft do things it was never meant to do." He paused. "I've flown with legends. None of them could have done what she did today." No one interrupted. No one objected. The words fell into the silence like stones into water. Quiet, heavy, true. The officials nodded. One or two murmured quietly. But no one dismissed him. They couldn't. The aircraft sat behind them, the satellite cradled beneath it, proof in black and steel. Sarah didn't bask in the moment. She gave a short nod, turned, and walked toward the equipment building, each step slow, grounded, final. People made space without being asked. Some saluted. Others just watched her go. The sound of her boots on concrete was the only thing that stayed behind. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The sky had judged her. And the sky didn't care about politics or protocol. It only cared about hands. And hers had proven everything. Sarah didn't stay for the aftermath. She didn't pose beside the aircraft or linger near the officers still murmuring in small clusters. She walked across the tarmac like it was any other day. No swagger, no need for anyone's approval, just steady steps heading toward the exit. The wind had picked up colder now, but she didn't pull her jacket tighter. The storm was behind her both in the sky and in the room. What needed to be said had already happened. Not in words, in altitude, in steel, in silence that changed people's minds without ever raising a voice. As she moved past the line of crew and command, some nodded. A few looked away, and others stared with something like respect blooming beneath the surface. She didn't judge them. People rarely see what they're not taught to look for, until they have no choice. Her father used to say that you don't rise to the moment. You fall back on your training, on what you built in the dark when no one watched. That's what saved her. Not a badge, not a name, just the work. She thought about the long nights in her youth reading flight manuals by flashlight, the mornings on old airstrips watching her dad trace wind patterns in dust with his boot. He had never promised recognition. He had only ever promised that someday, if she did it right, the aircraft would know who she was. And it had. That was enough. She passed the hangar and heard the engines ticking as they cooled, each sound small and fading. The storm hadn't taken her. The pressure hadn't broken her. She hadn't changed to fit the room. The room had shifted to fit the truth. There was no speech to give, no moment to savor. Just the quiet realization that real excellence doesn't announce itself. It shows up, does the job, and walks on without looking back. If this story moved, you share it, because there are people out there like Sarah. Skilled, overlooked, ready, and the sky doesn't care about status. It only listens to hands that know what they're doing. Sometimes the best response to doubt is not to argue, it's to land the plane.